if you're not always discerning, then you're kind of shutting yourself off from the action of the Holy Spirit in some way. There were some very seriously held opinions about whether an ice cream cake actually had cake in it. You've only been living here for a while, but I don't go to the store. I learn how to make an ice cream cake.
So Tito, you have made some waves this week on TikTok. It's been a while since I've seen you make a video, but I liked this one because it touched my heart in a very special way. You get on and you say, I love the friars, but sometimes I just don't understand them. Yeah. And it cuts to you with, what was it, a milk carton or cream carton? And instead of using the twist top, what did they do?
They opened it like a good old-fashioned milk carton from school. It was, by the way, half and half. And it has a little knob, a little spout, so you can just, twist it, pour it. But no, they decided to go in a different direction and open it from the side and do the whole. I don't understand.
It wasn't even that it was open from the side. It was that it was like barbarically open too, because it was ripped down the side.
Because it's not designed for that. Yeah, I felt like violence had been done upon me.
Oh, yes. It reminded me of a time in novitiate, you might remember this as well, where someone took an empty egg carton and put it back in the fridge.
Yep.
So not only did they not put it on the list, they put an empty carton back. So we thought we had eggs.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, there were a few times we had to do emergency runs to the grocery store. And of course, being novitiate, it's like, can we use the car? Can we go to the grocery store? Yeah, it's just,
the brothers. We love them, don't we?
We do. But sometimes, why are they the way that they are?
Sometimes we just wish there'd be a brother who lived in our house that had some sense of order, who had some sense of cleanliness, some sense of doing the things they're supposed to do. And we have that exact brother in my mind today.
Yes,
we're joining a brother that we lived with in our post-novitiate formation, after post-novitiate, after we were solemnly refessed, guardian of the house, wonderful friar, an intellectual friar, but also now a wonderfully preaching brother, makes me laugh all the time. And the best cook that I think we have in the province, maybe, at least for baking. I love his pies. Welcome to the show, John Barker.
Hi, brothers. How are you?
Brother Deacon, soon-to-be Father John Barker.
Correct. I have many words before my name nowadays. And the people here at the parish... And the people here at the parish are very confused because the day I got ordained a deacon, they didn't know what they were supposed to call me anymore. And some of them kept calling me Brother John, which I've been called forever, and which I actually prefer, at least for right now. And then others insisted that I was supposed to be called deacon. So I had to stand up at Mass one day and say, okay, let me tell you, either one is fine. Either one is fine. So everybody just calls me what they want to call me, which is what they've always done anyway. So
sure. Just don't call me late for dinner, whatever cliche you want to use, right? Well, speaking of dinner, what have you cooked lately? Extraordinary things. I look forward to Fridays when you cooked when we lived together.
That's right. Yeah, Fridays. I don't do as much cooking where I currently am as we did at Blessed Giles. We do have a nice lady who comes in and cooks several days a week, and I fill in on the other days. I don't do as much baking as I used to, but I have made some carrot cake, and I did make a coconut cream pie, which is one of my favorites, not too long ago. And then I keep finding new recipes because, whenever you live with different brothers, there are dietary requirements, or there are just some things that they just don't like. And you try to work around that. And so that keeps me on my toes, and I enjoy that. I like trying new things.
Yeah, you had a great policy when we lived with you that for our birthdays, you would cook us anything we wanted and bake us anything we wanted. And I remember you made me a lava cake one time, and you're like,
one time.
Never again. Yeah, you did not like that at all. And you made Dan ostrich. You found some.
I did make Dan
market.
Haran ostrich once, and that's
and
where
I decided never again.
That's right. With the brothers, I learned how to make ice cream cake because I think it was Dan's first time he was there for his birthday, and I said, "What do you want? What do you want for your birthday?" And he said, "Well, an ice cream cake would be great." And he likes chocolate. He likes chocolate mint. And I said, "Oh, okay. Well, I've never made an ice cream cake. That'll be cool. I'll. He said, "Oh no, you can just go to the store and buy an ice cream cake." And I said, I know, Dan. Dan, you've only been living here for a while, but I don't go to the store. I learn how to make an ice cream cake. So
You try it
I
6
had to learn
times.
how to make ice cream. Exactly. I had to, the first time was okay. And then I got an ice cream maker. I mean, it became a whole thing. Fortunately, other guys also wanted, like John Ahern also liked to have ice cream cakes. So,
Well, if I remember correctly, and Tito, you need to jump in here. I'm curious. There are 2 schools of thought with an ice cream cake. What is an ice cream cake to you? How would you define an ice cream cake, Tito? What does it involve?
Me? So, okay, this is just what I grew up with. And understand that I don't really care. But
Sugar.
what I grew up with was a layer of cake and a layer of ice cream covered in frosting. That's what I grew up with as an ice cream cake.
That's
It was
wrong.
at this
I'm
house.
sorry for your childhood.
It was at this house that I learned other people grew up with different things.
yeah, apparently you grew up in an abusive household, Tito, and you didn't know it because as you all know, we live with some brothers with very firm opinions about various things. And I, like you, Tito, I have no dog in this fight. I couldn't care less.
Right.
But there were some very seriously held opinions about whether an ice cream cake actually had cake in it or not. And I learned all about this. And then, of course, you get online and you find out that there's whole Reddit threads.
Of
about
course there
this, and and don't mention it on Twitter because it's bad enough as it is.
People's personalities are based off of it.
But we had a lot of fun. I mean, we had so much fun doing that. And it was a great thing. I don't get to do it as much as I'd like now, but again, one day, I think.
One day. We'll have to bring that back. The pies were always fantastic. We always had voting right before Thanksgiving, which pies were going to happen.
right.
It
That's
was
right.
a major house chapter.
Yeah.
That was. And then I would just make all of them, I would just make all of them. So we
You
would
got 10
have
people and
I mean,
5
I mean,
pies. Why
it was, you try to be devoted to poverty, but then when you have 6 people with 6 different pie preferences, you don't want to have your favorites. So you just put them all out there.
Well, and there's 1.5 kitchens at that house, so
There were. Well, when somebody wasn't living above the garage, I had an extra kitchen for Thanksgiving and Christmas. And I was telling someone the other day, I guess it wasn't the other day, it was around Christmas time when the tree decorating went on. I said, I am not in the habit of decorating trees. What I would do is pay off the brothers. I would make fried chicken and hush puppies, and they would decorate the tree.
Yep.
And everybody won on that one.
Fair trade.
And then sometime in January, when I got tired of the tree at 3:30 in the morning, when I was drinking my coffee, I would just take it down.
Yeah.
And that's what this brother's like. So
I often think of that. Tito, every once in a while, you ever wake up at like 3 or 4 in the morning? You're like, oh, thank God, I've got a couple more hours of sleep. I always think that, and I think, oh, John's already awake.
Yes, I know.
and ready for my first nap, in fact, by that time.
That's right.
I think
I have very strong Trappist leanings in me. Very strong Trappist.
I think I was channeling you on a Friday because I woke up Friday morning at like 3 a.m. and I wasn't going back to sleep.
Oh my gosh.
And I didn't think about that until just now. Like, oh yeah, we chatted Friday morning, and so it must have been, or Friday afternoon. So I must have been channeling you.
Yeah, you might have been. Well, and I'm such an early morning person that if I don't live with other early morning friars, which is pretty common, I get used to having the place to myself for hours.
Yeah.
And then when you have a change of friars in a house, and suddenly you have another early morning. Nobody's as early morning as I am, but relatively early morning. Then all of a sudden there's this intruder who lives in your house, but he is in fact an intruder, and you have to learn how to just pretend that you haven't just seen each other because it is not time to talk. And so, but we always figured it out every year. I loved living at that friary. It was and I loved living with the friars who had just made solemn profession, and I love living with newer, younger friars. It was great.
I want to go back to the conversation really quickly about, different friars with different tastes, and learning new recipes. I'm of the opinion that if there's someone who has a skill set with cooking, you give them the benefit of the doubt. Like, you give them some credit. So I remember.
Are we talking about Juan again?
We knew it was coming.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Because I remember you said you made tuna casserole, and I don't know if I said anything out loud, but I definitely was like, tuna casserole is not my favorite. But I have to admit, I really like your tuna casserole, and I ate it because you made it, because you have credit in my mind of like, oh, John's a very good cook. So if John makes it, I'm going to give it a try. And I don't like strongly dislike tuna casserole, but I really like yours, which cannot be said about any other tuna casserole.
No,
Well, I can add something to that.
I
'cause
remain
believe
honored.
Your tuna casserole has some mustard in it,
Yes. Yeah.
which I loathe mustard, and I just,
I remember that.
it
I
makes me
remember that you
vomit.
don't. Yeah.
And I remember tasting a hint of it, but I was like, you know what? It's not bad. I can do this.
There's a little Dijon.
mixed
in
well.
It, yeah.
Yeah.
I managed to slip Dijon into pretty much anything I could.
I notice sometimes. It's like, oh, okay, it's here. But all the other flavors are so good.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing that we would have debates about, which actually, you know me, I have strong opinions about certain things, but most everything else I'm not, whatever. But macaroni and cheese is one of those things that I have very strong opinions about. And there's two schools of macaroni and cheese. So I don't care about ice cream cake, but macaroni and cheese, there's the kind that you bake.
You are from the South.
You bake, and that's the real kind. And then you have the kind that other people make, which you can stir. And that's, And Dan would
Liquid gold.
frequently come down. He had boxes of that craft stuff, and I mean, I'm a good friar. I will eat what you put in front of me. I will. Sure. I'm actually not. Tito accused me of being a foodie one time. I remember this, and I said, "No, Tito, you're a foodie. I'm not a foodie.
Yes, Tito
I just like making different kinds of food. But if you put Spam in front of me, I'll eat Spam. I don't care. And
So will I.
right. So
I think
but
we're
you'll
forgetting.
you'll take a picture of it.
Here.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think
anyway,
we might be burying the lead here. So we've been
I don't know
talking
what's
about how
going on.
great of a cook he is.
Yep.
But the best part of John cooking was that he would play music while he cooked that often matched the food.
Theme. Yeah.
I still do that.
When we had
yeah.
Swedish meetballs, we had ABBA playing.
That's
Why
right.
not?
That's
Indian
right.
food, you know we were getting Indian music.
Yeah, I do. I still do theme cooking. I do. Yeah. Yeah.
Got to get you in the mood. So let's transition for a second here. So the reason we were living with you, John, because you were teaching, you were a professor at the time, and this is how Tito and I knew you, as the scripture scholar, as the teacher at our seminary, and that's just kind of who you were, and that's not who you are now, which is really interesting to be however many years professed you were, and to really pivot. I'm curious if you could talk about kind of that discernment after the discernment, because I think a lot of people have this image that once you decide what you're going to do, that's what you do the rest of your life, but that's not how friar life works.
That's exactly not how friar life works, or at least it's not how it has to work. It's not a one and done. In fact, I would say that if you're not always discerning, then you're kind of shutting yourself off from the action of the Holy Spirit in some way. And guys do that in lots of different ways. Some guys, they find something and they do that and they do it really well and they become expert at it. And they're a great gift to the fraternity and to the church and to the world. And it's wonderful. Other people are like me. You think you have it, and then a few years later, you kind of realize, no. So I love teaching. I had studied to be ordained, and I'd also gotten an MA in Scripture. I got permission to go on and do a doctorate in Scripture so I could teach at CTU, hopefully, and I got that job, which was great. And I taught there for 8 years. I taught the friars. I taught a lot of other people, and I loved it. I loved being in the classroom. I love talking about
great
God.
at it.
And thank you. And I got a lot of joy out of it. And I love talking about God. I taught the Old Testament, which is not an easy sell. But I managed to convince at least a few people that God in the Old Testament is the same God we meet in Jesus. He might just look a little different sometimes, but he's the same God. And I loved it. But the thing about teaching when you're in academia is that teaching itself is actually a relatively a smaller percentage of the time. I one time actually sat down and calculated, and I calculated that I taught about 10% of my time. The other 90% was doing various things, some of which I really enjoyed, some of which I really hated. And and the things that I really didn't enjoy doing were things that were to feed the academy. CTU was great, and working at CTU was really beautiful because writing for pastoral purposes was expected there. It wasn't just accepted; it was expected. But outside of you have a lot of biblical scholars who they don't want to read that. They want to read stuff. And they want to read really like what they consider rigorous academic stuff. And so you have to kind of feed the monster every once in a while to keep it up. And I just couldn't, my heart wasn't in that.
Well, and I think that's what I loved about you as a teacher is that you had a love for what you were doing and not just an intellectual thing. So it wasn't just like, here's the text that we're going to dissect. It was from a place of faith. Not that other people don't have faith, but it definitely came out in your teaching. And sometimes in a funny way, too, because I remember you talking to the Jewish professor and saying, do you even love Moses? Because you just had like a deep love for what you were doing.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not up here, it's in here.
That's right. Let's
clarify. They were friends.
She does. She does.
Yes,
yeah, we're very good friends, and she does love Moses. But there were times I wondered. But so I found myself becoming increasingly agitated, and the image that often comes to my mind at that time in my life, and this was just a few years ago, right before COVID, actually, was of a moth in a glass jar, and you're trying to move beyond your space, and you can't get out there. You can sort of see it. You can't see it real well, but you can sort of see it, and that's kind of how I felt at that time. And it wasn't just with my job. I was going through one of those periodic times in at least my life where everything just seems, I don't know. I think it was actually something of a midlife crisis. It wasn't my first one. It probably won't be my last one. But you can have a good midlife crisis or a bad one. And I tried to make this a good one. And I felt just God was calling me to something different, but still using all of the things that I loved about what I was doing. And so I didn't know what that was. So I got permission from our province for me to leave teaching and figure out what I wanted to do. And they were very gracious about letting me do that. They didn't demand that I have something figured out, which would have been not so great because I didn't. So I moved to Detroit for a year.
You talk about a midlife crisis. You know, some guys have a midlife crisis. They buy a fancy car or they start to like work out a ton. You became a priest. Right. That's your midlife
I became
crisis.
a priest, right. And like every other aspect of my discernment, including being a friar and being a biblical scholar and a teacher, all of this was a complete surprise to me because I didn't plan any of this when I was growing up. None of it. And even when I joined the friars, other than being a friar, which surprised everybody, I thought I was going to do this one thing, and I ended up going in all these different directions. And the same thing happened when I discerned or began to discern about becoming a priest. So like I said, I had the education. I had done all of the theological studies. I had done all the practica, the presiding, and all of those things. But I had asked if I could defer that so I could go on and do the doctorate work. And I never gave it any more thought. I really didn't. And then one day I was sitting in Detroit. This was 3 years ago. And it was August 4th. I was in our chapel. I was praying early in the morning. And it's August 4th, you may know, is the feast of St. John Vianney, who is a patron saint of priests, and particularly well known for the many, many hours that he would spend hearing confessions. People would line up. He would start at like 1 o'clock in the morning. So you know he's a patron saint of mine. He's up and ready to go at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And I was pondering how much I love that particular sacrament and how much it has meant to me. And suddenly it popped into my head, wouldn't it be a joyful life to be able to share that sacrament with other people? Wouldn't that just be a wonderful thing? And then the next thing that popped into my head was, well, you are looking for your next thing to do. Maybe it's time to pick up the priest thing again. And so I sat with that for a while. Then you do all the things that we need to do. Talked to the spiritual director, prayed, talked to my provincial Mark Sainer at the time, talked to the council, and we started moving in that direction. But we wanted to take some time on that, make sure that it was the right thing. So I moved around a little bit, went to Jamaica for a while, and now I'm here in Indiana. I've been living at this parish for over a year, and I was just ordained a deacon in January, and I'm scheduled to be ordained a priest in August. And it seems like an absolutely right thing to do. And you know, they tell you in discernment that if other people see things in you, then that's a good sign. And if you are at peace and you feel like it feels right. I don't feel like I'm in that jar anymore. I feel like I'm flying out, and I'm using all the things, the gifts that I've developed, that God gave me, and the skills I've developed, bringing that with me. And it's easy for me, it would have been easy for me to think it's too late, or because I graduated from CTU in 2008. So that was a while ago.
Ooh.
It's 2000. I know. Some of you weren't born yet, right, Tito? Right?
No, hey. I was an adult.
I'm glad you were an adult. So
I'm soon to be an adult.
Yeah. So, but I don't regret any of those meanderings along the way. And I certainly don't regret the years that I spent teaching, because those have absolutely helped me get here. And I feel like
you'll
I'm
probably
right
have
back
some more.
doing that.
Yeah.
I will have some more. I continue to teach. I just don't have to grade papers anymore. And that was not ever my favorite part of the thing. But I get to
even
do
more meandering.
Yep.
Where will we be in 20 years? It's
and
crazy.
more. I don't know.
Think about
That's the thing is, I've learned to allow myself to be surprised. I've learned, and that has been something really serious because of all the different things that I interiorly have gone through over the last few years, which included negotiating how I'm thinking about what it means to be a Franciscan today, and which has been very fruitful, but sometimes really difficult and challenging and even painful for me. But all of that is just part of what you bring to preaching and priesthood, along with so many other things. But we bring our journey, we bring our pilgrimage.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
It was definitely
and
a surprise to us. I remember being with Tito when we started to hear rumors. You remember this, Tito?
Oh, the rumors started circulating.
It was.
Yeah.
Because I think we were sitting in the car next to each other. And you're like, hey, I heard this rumor. And I was like, I've got his phone number. I'll text him right now.
I remember I was in the car and I got this text. I was at a council meeting and we were coming back from dinner, and I got this text from Tito saying, so is the rumor true? Didn't tell me what the rumor was. And I thought, well, probably. I'm not sure what the rumor is, but it's probably true. And so I figured that somehow you.
Well, there were two layers to it, because the first was that the Pope changed the rule that lay brothers could become provincials now.
Right.
It was very clerical.
Right.
So we text you, and you're like, you're not free. You're living in this lay brother world, so you never had to have any authority.
So now there was no point in not becoming a priest anymore, because
Exactly.
As long as I wasn't a priest, I was safe. But now that I'm not safe from being, I mean, I don't think I have to worry too much, but at least for a while.
Hey, we vote again in a year and a half, maybe.
Yeah, well, I'll see how many friars I can alienate between now and then.
That didn't work before. It's not going to work now.
No, but I want to talk about the preaching aspect, because I've never heard you preach, but I have heard you lecture, and I really always enjoyed sitting in class, because you had a very clear love of the scriptures, especially the Old Testament, which you and I shared. But you also, I think, were very good at imparting an appreciation for that to the other students, the other seminarians in class who were listening. And I think that's something that you can definitely bring to your preaching, is not just a love, but how to get other people to appreciate and love the scripture that we're hearing and listening to.
Yeah, I think you're right. I didn't think of it this way at the time. But since I've been preaching now for a few months, and I've been doing a lot of, I continue to study. I want to be a very good preacher. I want to make sure that I'm the best preacher that I possibly can be. And so I study. I practice, obviously, by preaching, but I also study. And one of the words that I hear a lot in preaching talk is connecting. How do you connect with people? You've got to be able to talk to other fellow human beings and not just give them information about who Jesus is and what he did and how much he loves us, but to be able to make that meaningful in people's lives, because that is not something you can assume, that any of this is meaningful to people. Mm-hmm. And so it has to be meaningful to you first. So I think that the most important thing you can do to be a good preacher is to be a person of prayer. If you're not a person of prayer, please don't stand up and preach, because what you're going to give is an exegetical lecture, or you're going to give your opinions about something,
or
you're
pious dribble,
or
lots
pious
of nice
dribble,
words that don't
or
mean anything.
not much substance, and it has to come. The word has to come through you. It has to. So what you're sharing is the fruit of. You're not being so personal that it's your personal piety, but it's still personal, and people can see that. And so this idea of connecting is something that I realized that I was doing when I was teaching, because you try to understand, where are my students coming from? Where are their, particularly in Old Testament, like at the beginning of my introduction to Old Testament course, which was one of my favorite, that and Exodus were my two favorite courses to teach. And I would begin by saying, all right, be honest. What do you think of the Old Testament? Mm-hmm. Be honest. What do you think of? What have you heard? What do you think you know about the God of the Old Testament?
The angry God.
Yeah, the angry. And so students would write on a card. I would give them a card, and I would say, answer these questions, and then share with a couple people, because at CTU we always share with people. So, but this actually was helpful, and so they would share with that and introduce, and then they would introduce each other. And so, because I would have 35, sometimes 40 people in this class, and I didn't know who any of them were. So we started to learn who people were, and you start to get to know them, and you learn where people are coming from. What are they bringing with them when they come to this class? What presuppositions about the Old Testament? Almost universally. Tito, you might have been one of the few exceptions, but almost universally it was, I expect this class to be boring. And I said, challenge accepted. And
do you not know John Barker? It's going to be
well, eventually the rumors would get that it wasn't a boring class. But you would work a lot, but it wasn't a boring class. Mm-hmm. And so I learned that you need to start where people are. And if they think that the Old Testament is not for them, you start there and you try to show them that it is for them. It's the same thing in preaching. You don't lecture, but you also have to figure out, where are people? What do they or don't they think about the gospel? Mm-hmm. What have they heard? What have they seen on YouTube? What have they read? I mean, where are they? Just because they're sitting in a pew on a Sunday doesn't mean they may know the faith in a catechetical sense, but that doesn't mean that it's gotten into their heart or into their their way of life.
I think you're right that we assume too much about their faith. I mean, I work in a high school and I preach to them all the time, and every once in a while I'll get a teacher or two that's like, you should be preaching harder. Like they need the catechism. Like, they don't even know who God is. You got to start really low, and I think sometimes you come on too strong, and they're not going to listen to the next time you speak.
Mm-hmm. Why should they? And the thing is, it's like with the teaching again. What I want you to do is fall in love. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's what I want you to do. So what do I need to do in truth? Not making anything up, not sugarcoating anything. Nobody wants that. How can I help you see how lovable our God is? And how the life that Jesus calls us to is hard. He's not shy about that. It's hard, but why is it worth it? Why? And you have to, that's not something you're going to persuade anybody in one homily or even several. You got to work at it, and you got to model it. And it's a full package sort of thing. But I think a lot of times,
ever taken your class, they know one word. What is that one word?
Hesed. Yes.
What does God need for the people at home?
God's fidelity, covenant fidelity, commitment, love, and yes, everybody learns that word with me.
That's right.
They're His people. That's right, and He is.
I used this one time
God.
to explain it. I had, without getting all the details, but I had friends do something really nice for me, and it kind of came out as like, you're our friend, like you're my people, like I'm going to make this sacrifice, we're going to do this. And it was just like this great moment of non-religious people understanding fidelity and hesed, and just,
that's right.
You feel it. You're like, yeah, you've disappointed me, but we're going to do it anyway because you're my people. And whoever you are, you're still mine.
That's exactly right. And that's how God is. And that's the whole point of Jesus, really. And so helping people see that. And so preaching for me, I remember when I started preaching, a lot of people thought that I would just stand up and explain the Bible to them because that's and I thought, and actually it's like, no, I used to do that. And now I'm doing this, and this is not about explaining the Bible to you. That's not what preaching is. It's about our documents tell us that, from the bishops and the Vatican tell us that preaching is about facilitating an encounter with Christ. And that is something that has to be done. It's a challenge because it has to be done on a very personal level because it's an encounter. And, it's not so difficult to preach at our daily Mass. We have a lot of people at our day. We have like 60 people at daily Mass here, which is fantastic.
That's really good.
And I can name pretty much all of them. I know many of them. They're a little easier to preach to sometimes because you can assume certain things with them, that they're faithful, they're trying to. You can't assume they're saints, but you also can assume that they're working on that. They're trying, or you can go ahead and assume that. And but Sunday it's different. Sunday you got the whole world's there, and half of them may not even want to be there. And so, as I've mentioned to you, I've really become almost laser focused on Sundays to preaching to the young people. Because if you can connect with young people, and I'm talking 12, 13 up, not, again, surprises, not a demographic I have ever been comfortable with, including when I was 12 and 13. Yeah, I mean, when I was that age, I was uncomfortable in general. And I think most of us are, whether we admit it or not. Yeah. They're tough years. Yeah. And so to try to connect in a Sunday Mass with some using something that can get them to see how any of this has anything to do with what they're going through. I believe that if you can connect with young people, then you can bring the adults along too, because they'll remember what that was like. Or in many ways, they've just got an adult version of the same stuff. We all still want to know we're loved. We all still struggle with what people think of us. We struggle with what is a good life. How do I deal with whatever pressures are coming at me in a way that's healthy and holy and good? Those are not questions that go away, and they start really young. Mm-hmm. And so, I consider young people at risk in our church for lapsing and disaffiliating and wandering away. And I don't take older people for granted, but I wish we were better at connecting with younger people. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious,
and I'm working really hard to do that.
You're new to this, and I remember, I'm now coming up on 5 years preaching, and I haven't become cynical or anything like that, but I think I've become a little familiar with it, that getting up and preaching is not new anymore. And I definitely think I had a little bit more, certainly fear, but like excitement at the beginning, and it's fresh, and you starting new stories. I think you maybe have the greatest clarity when you first start preaching. Do you sense anything that you really want every preacher to know, that you'd like? Here's what I'm learning right now.
What I'm learning is that people respond really well when they can see that you actually believe what you're saying. That this goes back to being a person of prayer and coming, is when I'm actually, and people who know me know that when I believe something, I'm pretty fervent about it, and I'm emphatic. I don't speak at a low tone. I move my hands. I mean, I'm out in the arena trying to get somebody to listen. One of my favorite things that I've learned about preaching is that we are messengers. It is not our message. We are messengers, and we are witnesses. And you need to be both of those. You need to be a witness. They need to see that you are talking about something that you know, not just up here, but here. As imperfect and as fellow sinner as you are, you know where the bread is, and you want them to come get bread too. And so I think that's a big part of it. And so if we're struggling with that, if we've been preaching for a long time and we just feel like we don't have anything else to say, it's time to start praying more, probably.
Sure.
I mean, it's hard. I can't give it, but I think that's a big thing. But people want to know that we who have been given the privilege of standing up and making them listen to us for a few minutes have something important to say, something that means something to them, that's a treasure that we want to share, and that we are fellow sinners and pilgrims on the way, and we just want to bring everybody else along with us. And people, they'll listen and they'll give it a try. So that's been my thing. I've also been reading about young people. So you asked me, Casey, what have I been learning? And one thing is, I said, this is not my demographic. But I work here with women who have teenagers. And so I am learning to ask them all sorts, what are your kids, what do they really struggle with at this age? I remember what it was like, but that was a long time ago, and some things are very different. Other things are exactly the same. And so I don't want to be the old guy who stands up there pretending that he's, hey, young hip people like me, I don't want to do that. And that's not my style. But to be able to let them know that this guy with the white beard up here, he knows what it's like to be you a little bit. Mm-hmm. He remembers. And, I think people, they want to hear that. They want it. And I think that's one of the great things about preaching in general, but Franciscan preaching. We're not supposed to be standing over somewhere telling you what you need to do. We're supposed to be milling about with the people and learning what their lives are like, so that we can see the connection with our own life and then share. I have a very conversational style. I don't use a script, which can sometimes lead me off in directions, but people are patient, and I try to be focused. But
yeah. But there's also, I think, an authenticity, right? And I think that's really, really important, especially for preachers. One of the things that I grew up in the military, so I moved around and I heard a lot of priests preach. And there are some stories and jokes that I heard several times. And I was like, and as I got older, I was like, oh, this is from homily helpers. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you hear a priest say this thing in one country, he's a military chaplain, then you hear another priest say it somewhere else, and I'm just like, oh, this is okay. And
you begin to suspect,
but I also immediately disengage because I'm like,
cliche.
This guy's it's a cliche. This guy has heard this somewhere, and he's going to use it here.
Yeah.
When I use examples, I try to use examples from my own experience, whether they're about me or about someone else or something that I witnessed. I try to use those examples from my own experience so that it's authentic to who I am and the experiences that I've had.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that we do really well as friars is we bring in the personal, whether it's, we don't make it about us. I'm not saying that, but we bring in
but you can make it about us.
Right.
You make it about we. And you can use your own experience, or like I've and I hate gimmicks. I hate gimmicks in preaching. I absolutely and I do. I'm sorry anybody out there listening, but I hate when preachers tell jokes. I think that they are.
You can be humorous,
rarely,
but don't tell jokes. There's no room for jokes.
Humor is wonderful. Jokes, I'm sorry. You don't need to warm me up. You need to interest me, and. Right. Once you tell a joke, sometimes the joke has nothing to do with what's coming afterwards, in which case you've entertained me for a minute, and now I can go start reading the bulletin, because now you're going to start telling me the stuff I don't really care about. And so, but humor engages people, warm humor, gentle humor, sort of the stuff in life that we know. But I think, and I always, I want to make sure that my point is correct, but to leave, Pope Francis has talked about this too. And he's certainly not the only one, but he's one of the more recent ones I've heard say that, you need to appeal to people's sentiments without being sentimental. Mm-hmm. So their feelings, their heart, what is your heart yearning for? And our tradition tells us that every human heart, whether we know it or not, we're yearning for the good and the true and the beautiful. And so how can you appeal to that human heart and help awaken that and help them see that what God offers them in the gospel is good and true and beautiful and is already doing good, true, and beautiful things in their life, and helping them see that. But sometimes you have to go with kind of weird, quirky life, So one day at Mass, I asked, how many of you ever played dodgeball when you were in school? And like everybody raised their hand. And then I said, how many of you liked playing dodgeball? And I was shocked to see that many people raised their hand. And
yeah, fun.
I wasn't one of those because those were tough years for me. But the point of this was, we all know what it's like to feel isolated and alone and feel like we don't know if anybody's on our side. That was my experience in dodgeball, like literally alone, only one, and all the balls coming at me. Last week we're doing
people remember it.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, it's an image so you can remember. It's a dodge, and when we have those dodgeball moments.
To it.
Right.
You don't have to say the word "I was afraid" or "isolated." They know in their heart what that felt like. I think what's so important, and it may be slightly a hot take here, but I think the biggest problem with preaching, I find, is that it tries to do too much. That we have 7 points when you really need one. And so the hot take is, I think priests would actually benefit from being on social media a little bit more, to some extent, in that, can you make your homily in 1 minute? Can you get to the point? Right. And then you can elucidate with other stories or things. But I think a lot of times priests don't know what their 1 point is. They say, I'm going to talk about mercy today. No, that's not a point. Yeah. That's a concept.
Right.
What do you
I
want
think you're right about that.
In one sentence?
That's right. I think, the standard advice is you ought to be able to summarize the point, So last week for me, I talked about, did anybody have monsters under their bed when they were kids, or in the closet? Because when it's dark, the monsters come out. But when mom and dad turn the light on, the monsters go away. And it was the man born blind, and Jesus is the light of the world. And so, when we're afraid, when we're confused, when we're stumbling around in the dark, Jesus can bring clarity and light to our lives. That's a single point.
Yep.
And you talk about that. And so I think you're right, because we often do try. I know I try to make up for years and years of stuff so I have a hard time keeping, make it a little shorter today because we've got a baptism, and I'm like, okay, I'll try, but now we've got a baptism, and I want to talk about a baptism. So
will they come back next week? That's the goal.
Hopefully will they come back next week. That's right. I think you're right, and I think this is definitely a growing edge for me already identified, is that I can keep to a single point, but I want to get to where I can, at least during the week, be able to get it and not feel like I have to say more than I need to say. Give them something. Give people something substantial, but you don't have to complete their entire spiritual education in one homily. And I know that I struggle with that because I sometimes implicitly or even explicitly feel like I need to do that. And I don't.
I think it's helpful sometimes. Think about homilies that you remember years later. And why do you remember them, and what impact? I think there are a lot of homilies that have an implicit effect. So just because you're not able to repeat the whole thing doesn't mean it wasn't good. But there are some that stick in my head, like, wow, that was sort of life-changing, and here's why. Oh, that story was really important. It hit me at the right time. How do I recreate some of those things?
Yeah. Yeah, for me it's been, wow, I thought I was the only one. And then you find that the priest is up there talking about stuff, and you're like, I thought I was the only one.
I mean, so, you've gotten to, do a lot of things, and you're getting to do like all these kind of new experiences as you're preparing for your priesthood. But what's next for you?
Well, I don't know, because, we'll see what happens. I would like to stay here for a while where I am at this parish and get some experience in the various things that you do in a parish. Baptisms, we do a lot of baptisms, weddings, funerals. I'd like to get some of that experience and continue to preaching. And I really like it here. I like the people, and I've been well received, and I'm grateful for that. So we'll see. But as you know, who knows what the province is going to want. And so there's that. But I don't know if I want to do that forever. the project that you all have talked about, which is very explicitly evangelizing, I think, in a parish and outside of a parish, or maybe who knows, whatever it is, or different contexts, appeals to me a lot too. So I don't really have an answer to what's next. And like I said, I've been surprised by everything, so I could end up doing something. Whenever I get assigned to something, this sounds like just the nicest thing you're supposed to say as a friar, but in my case, it's absolutely true. I've learned to trust wherever I I didn't necessarily want to come here where I am, and it's been a great year. And I've grown a lot in a lot of ways. It is. It's true. I didn't want to be a guardian when they made me a guardian at Blessed Giles, but frankly, I think I was the only option. And I was glad I was. Well, I was glad I was too, because I was at a time, and I don't, not to get off on too much of a tangent, but I was at a time in my life where I really did need to reassess some of my life. And being a guardian, I was like, okay, well, apparently I'm supposed to animate the fraternity, which means I'm supposed to be some sort of a good example in some way. I suppose I should work on that. And that actually did lead to things that then led to me going off and it led to here in many ways. And so I've learned to just say, Lord, honestly, whatever you want me to do. And if I hate it for the first month, I'm sure it'll be fine after that, So,
sure. Well, you alluded to evangelism.
I may regret saying that on camera.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So we haven't told anyone about our workings yet. So this is maybe a little sneak peek for people that they exclusive to minor characters.
Oh, yeah.
Things are
Tune in. You
the
should do this
future.
at the beginning of the video so people they watch all the way to the end.
But evangelism is, I think, really important to all three of us, and I'm curious what that looks like to you, because obviously we're on social media, and I think that's been very important for me for a while. I love working with students, but there are so many ways and necessary things that need to be done with evangelism. Where does that fit in for you?
Right now, it definitely fits in with that aspect of the new evangelization, which is reaching the people who are already here and keeping them here. And again, I said earlier, young people, but not just young people, they're at risk. There's a lot of stuff that pulls people away. I'm more interested, however, I'm learning more about why do people stay? What is it that remain, and not just out of habit, or not just because they feel like they need fire insurance, but what is it? What is it that people respond to? And frankly, what I've heard is good preaching is one of the top things, that they learned the faith in a vital and meaty way from good preaching, not bloodless. Actually, that's one of the things that sends people away, is bloodless preaching that just sort of
and responding to the world as it is. I remember it has kind of haunted me throughout my formation. I had a family member say that they still go to church, but they just lost so much respect for the church. The Sunday after the September 11th attacks, the priest did not preach about it. And she's like, I don't care about Leviticus. Who cares about Leviticus? I want to know what we should be doing as a church today.
Yeah. It's astounding. I can't sit in judgment of any of our brothers that preach, but I can say that the studies that people have shown show that our preaching broadly in the church, and I think our friars can be guilty of this too, is not connecting with people. Yep. It's abstract, it's bland, it's informative, but not inspiring. And we got to listen to that. Otherwise, why are we standing up there? It's not like we're standing up there, and I think people are remarkably patient with us, frankly. They are earning their way one way or another. If you can earn your way to heaven, this is definitely the way to do it, is to stand up and put up with us for days. But to be able to talk to people, even when there's 300 people in the room, to be able to talk to people and say, I'm really excited about this thing that I see God doing in this gospel today. Or that I see God doing in Leviticus sometimes even. And so, I'm really excited about this, and I have an insight about how this can be meaningful for at least some of us today. And I want to share that with you.
Yeah.
That's good preaching.
I just heard some anecdotal evidence that I think supports exactly what you're saying. One of the students who, I got to know through the chaplain's office here, she's studying abroad. And she just messaged me the other day, said, my roommate's trying to convert me to non-denominational. And I was like, well, what is she saying? And she goes, well, she used to be Catholic, and then she met Jesus, and now her whole family is with her non-denominational. And
It's so much to hear that.
It does. It's very painful and shaming to hear that.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, she was Catholic for years. Her family was Catholic for years.
Yeah.
And no one had facilitated an encounter with Christ in a faith where we receive the Eucharist, where we experience communion.
Yeah.
They didn't have an encounter with Christ. That's challenging to us.
It is. And let me tell you, and we might lose some viewers at this point, but when I was in Detroit, so after I left CTU and I moved, and I said, I need to move, I need to reassess, I moved to Detroit, and I ran into a group of Franciscans who are of a more charismatic bend, not a sort of spirituality that I had ever thought was even meaningful to me at all. But again, surprise, I ended up really learning a lot from them, and I became, charismatic for me is I don't speak in tongues, but if anybody does, it's fine. But not that there's anything wrong with that. but just the thing about the charismatic renewal is that it does do exactly what you're talking about, Tita. It focuses on that personal relationship, and that means it's a Eucharistic revival, like the one we're going to see in Indianapolis in a few months, just right up the road from me. It's Eucharistic because that's a personal encounter with Christ, but it's also appealing to the mind and the heart. And I walked away from that relationship with those Franciscans with a renewed heart in many ways, and I filtered that through the rest of me. But it was an amazing thing. So I think probably again, God kept me out of the priesthood until God was ready for me to be in the priesthood. And one of the things is all of these things I have done since then have been preparing me for that. So we'll see what the next thing is. I don't know.
Yeah. When's the date?
August 23rd, 4 p.m., Oldenburg, Indiana. Everybody's invited.
You're all welcome.
Yes.
That's right.
Well, we're so proud of you, happy to call you a brother, happy to watch this journey over the last couple of years. I think you're going to be a great priest and someone that I looked up to in formation, but also now just someone deep in prayer, someone you can always count on for that fidelity of God. And I think in a world that is so polarized in kind of the intellectual or the sentimentality, you bring a rootedness in the good things of both. That's not purely head, it's not purely heart. And I think that's what people are looking for. So I've learned a lot from you and hope to continue to do that.
Yeah, well, praise God. Thank you. Yeah.
And I'm just always impressed by how you always courageously question. That was part of the relationship I think that you and I had. It was, we would have these conversations, which are great conversations, in which you were saying, I'm struggling with this and I'm questioning myself on that. And just modeling that and being able to, give voice to those was always impressive to me.
I think being able to be vulnerable with people and not worry that they're going to think that you're, or even, that's a very Franciscan thing. That's a Christian thing. Mm-hmm. Frankly, it's a Christian thing. But it's definitely a Franciscan thing is to just be able to say, yeah, I don't know what's going on either. I don't. And I'm trying to figure it out. And all I know is I'm struggling with this. And the polarization thing has always just been really, really hard for me. Other people thrive on it, and I just want to crawl under my bed. And I got to learn how to deal with that a little bit more too. Speaking about it, I'm finally going to be making my presence known on Facebook again after 15 years.
Wow.
When I ran away screaming and hiding.
Well, let me tell you.
Well, let me tell you. It's not like I got
That's
anything
the biggest
to say,
bombshell.
but yeah, you can put that as your lead-in. Yeah, but I mean,
get you on
it's
X.
not like oh no, no, I'm not ready for that. That's for the big boys and girls, not for me.
I'm not on that one either. Don't worry about it.
Just to be able to share again the gospel. So you asked me again. You guys are much more into the social media and all that stuff, and you've done great work, and I know you will continue, and other people have too. I still shy away from that. One, because it can be a time drain, and I can be, to be frank, I'm susceptible to that. So I need to be aware of that. But I also feel like I want to be able to, I don't know, it's not like I have such great thoughts, but to be able to share in some way with people and connect with people in that way. And also to know what's going on. Because, I mean, sure. I don't always know what's going on.
It's good to know the trends with the high schoolers. When I can know what the trend is, it helps connect.
You got to know what the kids are up to if you're going to talk to them.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I basically am like, okay, I'll get on Facebook, and we'll see. So, yeah.
Well, it's a brave new world out there for you, John. Thanks so much for joining us. Looking forward to seeing your next step as priest, and see how we might collaborate in this next project.
It would be great. I look forward to talking with you two more about that, and the other brothers too. And if you're able to come down to Oldenburg in August,
I'm putting in my calendar.
Yeah. Good, August 23rd. Okay, great.
All right.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, brothers.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Tito, what a guy.
Yes. We mentioned before when we talked to Juan, one of the best communities we lived in. John was a part of that community,
for sure.
and still one of the best.
Yeah, I think just the combination, too, of all the pieces. I mean, back-to-back weeks now, we've seen Juan and John. We've seen two Johns. We still have one more John from that community to talk about.
That's right.
But the commonality of prayer and willingness to get along with different people, I mean, clearly there was no one in that community had the same personality. And I think that's
very different.
Just the building block of a good fraternity is guys who are willing to step out a little bit and expand a little bit and work together. And I mean, when I think about him and Dan sitting next to each other at the dinner table, I mean, those were some fun conversations. Like, these men come from very different worlds.
Yes, yeah. But the willingness to encounter each brother as he is, and love him that way, I think is a huge part as to why that house works so well. We didn't expect each other to be anything other than our authentic selves, but we expected authenticity. And I think that is really what makes a good fraternity work.
And as we go through friar life, and we've had some ups and downs, we have some struggles in some of our fraternities. I go back to that and say, well, this is what's possible, and obviously it can be even better than that. But you've had that good experience. You lock it in and say, yeah, there are some good brothers. When the other ones are disappointing, when I'm disappointing myself, we have those moments to hold on to.
Yeah. Even from a logistical perspective, sometimes our house chapters can be a little long, and I'm like, hey guys, we could do a chapter and a business meeting separate. So I'm like, we did it in a house. It worked really well. And they look at me like I have two heads.
And we can also do creative house chapters, like a spiritual one on Star Wars, which you were not there for that one.
I wasn't.
We all went as a community and watched Star Wars, and then we reflected on it. It was great.
That sounds awesome.
Well, Tito, we still don't have a catchphrase or a sign-off, so I'm going to let you have the last word. What comes to mind? What should we say?
Well, in light of what we're going to celebrate kind of the next day, I'll just say, everyone, have a wonderful, blessed day. Enjoy these wonderful breaks that we get from Lent, but don't enjoy them too much.
Yes, I assume you're talking about St. Patrick's Day coming up.
I am, yes.
By the time they listen to it, it will have been long gone, but Easter is just a few days away by the time you're listening to this. Let's focus on that.
Focus on Easter. Focus on the celebration. We feast so that we fast so that we might feast.
Very good. We'll catch you next week.